Hello, I'm Jana Benton, Senior Vice President and Northern Nevada Small Business Manager for Nevada State Bank. This is the fourth of our 4 videos about Nevada State Bank's 2016 Small Business Survey. We discuss how government and legislation has affected Nevada's small businesses. We are always excited to have one of Nevada's leading experts on economic data with us today to discuss the survey results. Jeremy Aguro is a principal analyst with Applied Analysis, which conducted the Small Business Survey. Jeremy also serves on the advisory board for Nevada State Bank. So Jeremy, we have talked a little bit in some of the other segments about some of the more important legislations around taxation and the payroll tax. Why don't we talk a little bit about some of the special sessions that you're aware of that a lot of small business owners in Nevada might not be aware of and how they're going to impact them? Sure,
there's a lot going on in the interim this time, right? Our legislature meets for 120 days every other year, but that doesn't mean that things stop, right? I mean, there's tons of stuff happening. Of course, you mentioned the special session that we had recently for Faraday Futures, which is going to bring what it will be the biggest single investment in the history, I think, of North Las Vegas, other than maybe something like Nellis Air Force Base, of course. But in terms of private investment, it's likely to change the entire landscape of that apex area, which is in the northern portion of Clark County. They're talking about bringing in infrastructure. They're talking about bringing in a factory that's going to, a company that's going to spend $1 billion to manufacture what are going to be among the most technologically advanced cars on the planet today. You combine that with the fact that not only are they coming to North Las Vegas, which could really use that type of investment, but there's also some folks out there called Hyperloop that a lot of the folks may not know about. They're also going to benefit from some of the activities of the Governor's Office of Economic Development that are going to build what could be the most advanced way of moving people over long distances, essentially moving them through what I understand to be some kind of pneumatic tube and shooting them from Las Vegas to Los Angeles and back, which I think is absolutely great, right? Those special sessions have really mattered in terms of bringing folks like Tesla here and bringing folks like Faraday Futures. Yeah, they mean economic investments, and I think there's some concern. We saw in the Small Business Survey about how many incentives we're giving to business. I think that a lot of the discussion is about, hey, we're a different economy than we were a little while ago. That's great. Let's be careful about giving too many incentives to new companies. But what we have done has been nation-leading, if not globally important relative to economic development. You combine that with some of the other stuff that's going on. In Southern Nevada, there's the Southern Nevada Tourism Infrastructure Committee is what it's referred to. In last summer, the governor used an executive order to create this committee that includes elected officials, that includes some of the highest executives from hotels and casinos, as well as folks from the convention center and the airport, to come in and say, okay, tourism is incredibly important to us. But what about the infrastructure behind all of that? Do we have the right infrastructure? Do we have the right roads? What about the convention center? What about stadiums? What about the airport? And what about pedestrian movement, which of course has made a lot of headlines for all the wrong reasons over the past couple of months? That committee will meet for a year. They're about 6 months through their work and will deliver to the governor and the legislature recommendations relative to what we need to do to shore up that infrastructure here in the state of Nevada. Of course, recently we've heard things about a new $1 billion stadium in Southern Nevada. We've heard people talking about even the Raiders coming to Las Vegas, or at least some of those talks. Look, I don't know how solidified any of those deals are, but I can tell you, because our company staffs that Southern Nevada Tourism Infrastructure Committee, that dialogue is very real, and there's a lot of those conversations going on. When you talk about convention-related facilities and what's going on around the United States to be much more competitive with the state of Nevada relative to those, other areas are spending billions of dollars to try and capture some of that activity. And when you talk about shows like CES or the just Magic and some of these other shows that take up huge amounts of convention space and fill up all kinds of hotel rooms here, those have become incredibly important. On the other side, of course, are the discussion about stadiums and the fact that UNLV really could use a a stadium of some kind. The big conversation seems to be domed or not domed, but I mean, of course, the conversation is bigger than that. During this interim, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas acquired 42 acres adjacent to its current property where it could put something like this. And now a combination of the Las Vegas Sands, which is owned, of course, by Sheldon Adelson, and Majestic Real Estate, which has been involved in this discussion for a long time and is owned by a gentleman by the name of Ed Roski that has a lot of experience in being able to develop this, is behind those projects. Those are two formidable developers with the wherewithal to be able to make something like that happen. A lot of these conversations, of course, are going to turn on the concept of public funding, right? How many dollars can we really generate? And if we go back to that small business survey, one of those things that we talked about in one of our earlier videos is that taxes really do matter. They are a big concern to small businesses. And the reality is we don't have, $500 million sitting on the shelf somewhere that we could divert to the convention center or the stadium. We're going to have to make some tough decisions in order to make those things happen, particularly if those are important to the long-term vitality of the industry that, frankly, is the biggest one that we have in the state of Nevada, so that's out there. There's other ones, not to keep rattling on, but the other one that I think has a lot of people's attention, well, I guess there's two that have a lot of people's attention recently, but two of them are, one, this interim committee that's studying what to do about the Clark County School District, right? The Clark County School District is the 5th largest school district in the entire country, and there are those that believe that it's just too big, that it's become too cumbersome to be able to deliver education effectively at the neighborhood level. And so this committee is going to be meeting over the next year to decide what is it that we can do in order to make education more localized so that maybe principals have more discretion over how they spend their money, that teachers and schools can be more flexible about how they deliver education at the level. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. We look at different schools in different areas, and they need to be concentrated in different things. And right now, maybe they can't be because they're a little too large. On the other side of the equation, however, is something that's important, and that is economies of scale, right? That sometimes big districts can deliver things like transportation or food services at a much lower price. It is a very challenging discussion. It is going on today, and I don't think it goes away anytime soon. Other ones that you've heard of are things like taxi cabs. Of course, there's a lot of conversation about taxi cabs. A state audit came out and said we should get rid of the taxi cab authority, so you're hearing a lot about that. And you're hearing a lot about rooftop solar and the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, and whether or not they should be doing things the way that they're doing. These conversations are not going away at all. And if there's one more that I can give you that I think people are going to hear a lot about in 2016, it's going to be about property taxes. The property tax calculations that we have in the state of Nevada are very complicated, but one of the elements of that is going to result in the fact that property taxes are not going to grow. They are going to remain almost flat next year. That is going to affect public safety in northern Nevada and in southern Nevada. It's going to affect schools in northern Nevada and in southern Nevada. I think you're going to hear a heck of a lot more about that in 2016.
What do you think is going to happen with legislation about growth? One of the things that I hear a lot, especially in northern Nevada with the announcement of Tesla, is infrastructure. And for example, do we have the roads? Do we have the water, the ability to bring water as the communities are going to grow with Tesla? And so what would the legislation be looking at for that?
Look, at the local government level, there may not be anything that's more important right now than infrastructure, right? You mentioned it exactly. You've got something like Tesla that's going to open. It's going to have thousands of employees that are going to work there. There are going to be other businesses that are going to move to northern Nevada just because Tesla's there. Where are you going to put them? Where are you going to put all of the employees that are going to work there? There are very real capacity challenges, particularly in northern Nevada, around things like sewer and water and housing. Those are real. I think that the community is moving toward that. Is there going to be legislation that's going to make that happen? You know, I don't know. I don't know that there's necessarily going to be some legislation that's all of a sudden going to make that we're going to do those type of roads. In the northern Nevada, there's a gentleman that runs the RTC up there. His name is Lee Gibson. He's probably as good as anybody in the United States in terms of managing transportation infrastructure. He will do a good job for the region. But the unfortunate reality with regard to all of us is you can only spend every dollar once, right? And infrastructure is increasingly expensive. There are places like Fernley, for example, where a lot of this economic development is happening. They are going to be challenged relative to that infrastructure, and today we're not prepared to deal with it. The nice part is it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to have time to prepare, but it is going to mean more investment, and particularly businesses, well, I shouldn't say in Northern Nevada. I think businesses across the state of Nevada are going to have to get prepared to start to make some of those investments, particularly around things like water. Southern Nevada, of course, we just opened the third straw, recently opened the third straw, which can deliver additional water to the community. But if you look around the western states, the Colorado River area, those resources are scarce. The drought is very real, and we in the state of Nevada are going to have to do everything we can to protect and develop water resources probably over the next decade.
What do you think is the number one concern around legislation and recent legislation that small business owners showed concern for on the survey, besides taxes?
Well, look, it's going to be taxes, taxes, and taxes. Look, I think that when we think about what they're concerned about, I think they're more concerned about Washington, D.C. What is the federal government going to do? I think they're concerned about things like the Affordable Care Act, which we've talked about in some of our videos, so I won't go through here. But more than anything else, it's not what they're concerned about being passed. It is the uncertainty of not being able to plan for the future because they don't know what legislation is going to come down the pipe. We've talked about minimum wage in these videos. We've talked about health care in these videos. We've talked about taxation and regulation. All of those have to do with what happens in Washington, D.C., what happens in Carson City, and what happens before city councils and county commissions across the state, right? Those decisions matter for small businesses. And I think sometimes lawmakers don't always see that or feel that or know that. It's incredibly important. So again, I realize you're asking me for what the one thing is. I don't know that I can point to that, but what I can tell you is that those changes from taxes to healthcare to regulation are the ones that are absolutely most concerning. But the ones that concern them the most are the ones they don't know about today.
As a small business owner, and especially around the Health Care Act, a lot of small business owners have been telling me that they have seen a significant increase with the amount they have to pay out for their employees. Do you think that's going to impact how many employees they're going to hire in the future? I
think it already is. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Look, I'm a small business owner, and I can tell you that it absolutely affects the decisions we make every day. Unfortunately, the way that it's going to first manifest itself is that when I have to make a decision to give a raise to an employee, I have to consider the total cost of that employee. That means the cost of rent or office space, industrial space, whatever that is. It also means the cost of health care. And I think that when we look at the results of the small business survey, that's exactly what folks said. They want to hire additional folks, but if now the cost of healthcare goes up by 20%, well, that means maybe they can't hire that next person, or maybe they have to give them a 2% raise instead of a 3% raise, or no raise at all because the amount of the cost of that employee has gone up by 5 or 10 or 20%. That's just kind of the reality in the market that we're dealing with today, and I don't think we've seen all of that yet. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to continue to see that as insurance companies try to feel out this new market and businesses decide, hey, look, can I continue to provide this level of benefits, or do I have to tell my employees, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to provide that anymore. If they're in a very small business category and can do that, I'm going to need you to go out onto the exchange and get your own health care, and maybe I'll help subsidize some of that. Those are very different things for employees and for businesses.
Jeremy, on behalf of Nevada State Bank, thank you again for your valuable insight and time. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. To download a free copy of the 2016 Small Business Survey, go to nevadasmallbusiness.com/survey. And if you'd like to get economic data from Applied Analysis in our monthly economic briefing, sign up to receive our e-newsletter at nsbank.com/newsletter. And I will tell you that I always read it, and I find it always very insightful. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.